What would you say if an officer told you to step out of your car right now and started asking questions you never expected? If you say the wrong thing, you can give away your rights in seconds. But one short question can force that officer to make something very clear right away. Before I reveal the exact words, hit subscribe so you can find this video again when a real stop happens. And tap like now, because your brain will not remember this under stress unless you lock it in today. Most people have no idea how fast a simple stop can turn into a fishing trip. You think you're just getting a warning, then suddenly you're answering questions about where you came from, where you're going, what's in your car, and why you look nervous. In the next few minutes, you're going to learn the 7-word question that puts pressure back on the officer, the follow-up line that tells you whether you're actually detained, the sentence that shuts down self-incrimination, and the one refusal that protects you if they try to search anyway. Let me show you exactly how smart drivers stay calm without sounding rude. I've analyzed over 200 Bodycam videos, and the pattern is always the same. Drivers who talk too much lose control fast. Drivers who ask the right question keep the stop narrow. This matters because your words create the roadmap officers use next. Now let's talk about what usually goes wrong. You get pulled over, your heart starts pounding. You want to seem nice, so you start explaining everything. You answer questions nobody asked. You guess. You joke. You say, "I didn't do anything wrong, officer," or "I'm in a hurry," or worst of all, "Sure, go ahead," when they ask for consent. Here's the reality. Officers are trained to watch how you react under pressure. The more you fill the silence, the more material you hand them. A stop that should last 5 minutes turns into 15. A warning turns into a roadside interview. And once you start volunteering answers, it's hard to take them back. You do not need to be rude. You do not need to argue. You do need a simple script. Because when you have words ready, panic stops making choices for you. The first thing you need is the 7-word question from the title. Here's exactly what you say. "What crime do you suspect me of?" Word for word, memorize that line. That question is powerful because it forces the moment to become real. If the officer is detaining you, there has to be a reason. Not a vibe, not a hunch, not because you looked nervous. They need a specific reason they can point to. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings. In Terry v. Ohio, the court said officers need specific facts that make them reasonably suspect crime is happening before they can briefly detain someone. In plain English, they need more than a guess. So when you ask, "What crime do you suspect me of?" you're not picking a fight. You're making them put their reason into words, and that matters. Because once they say the reason out loud, the stop gets smaller. It gets narrower. It gets easier for a judge, a defense attorney, and even bodycam footage to measure later. Bad way. Most drivers say, "Why are you harassing me?" Then the stop gets emotional and the officer gets more control. Good way. Smart drivers say, "What crime do you suspect me of?" Then the officer has to either explain the basis for the detention or back off the fishing. See the difference? One line sounds angry. The other line sounds calm, clean, and smart. Legal experts agree this is your strongest protection when a stop starts getting weird. Now, this does not mean you refuse basic lawful commands. If you're driving, you still hand over your license, registration, and insurance when required. If the officer tells you to step out of the car, courts usually allow that during a traffic stop. But once the questions drift away from the stop, your script matters. That is where most people fold. Let me show you exactly why this works in real life. An officer says, "You mind telling me what you're doing in this area?" You answer with your 7 words, "What crime do you suspect me of?" Now watch what happens. Either the officer names a traffic issue or suspicious conduct, which tells you what this is really about, or the officer gives a vague answer like, "I'm just asking questions." That vagueness helps you. It shows this may be more of a pressure tactic than a real detention. Defense attorneys use this exact line in court because it exposes weak reasoning fast. Former police officers have confirmed this works because it signals you know the difference between a real detention and casual probing. And that changes the tone of the stop. Without this question, you usually drift into a trap. You answer 10 questions, your answers don't line up perfectly because you're stressed. Then those normal stress signs get called suspicious. With this question, you force clarity before you keep talking. This is 100% legal and it can stop a lot of damage before it starts. Have you ever had an officer ask random questions that had nothing to do with the stop? Drop a comment below because I want to know how many of you have seen this happen in real life. The next line tells you whether you're actually stuck there or whether you can leave. You look at the officer and say this, "Am I being detained or am I free to leave?" Those exact words. Slow, calm, respectful. This line works because not every police encounter is a detention. Sometimes officers are just talking and hoping you act like you have to stay. That's where people get trapped. They think every badge automatically means every question must be answered. That is not true. In United States versus Mendenhall, the Supreme Court explained that a seizure happens when a reasonable person would not feel free to leave. In plain English, if a normal person would think, I can't walk away from this, then the law treats it differently. So your question does something huge. It forces the officer to pick one lane. If the answer is, you're free to go, then go. Stop talking. Leave calmly. If the answer is, yes, you're being detained, now you know this is official, and now the officer has locked into that position. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings, and it matters because vague police encounters are where people talk themselves into trouble. Bad way. Most drivers say, I guess I'll just stay here and answer. Then a voluntary chat turns into a long roadside interview. Good way. Smart drivers say, am I being detained or am I free to leave? Then the officer has to define the encounter right there. Here's the reality. Officers sometimes rely on confusion, not always, but often enough that you need a script ready. Florida v. Royer made clear that police cannot stretch a temporary stop into something bigger without proper legal grounds. In plain English, they cannot quietly turn a brief check into a full-blown detention and search just because you stayed confused. Watch what happens when this line is used well. The officer says, hang tight, I just want to ask a few things. You say, am I being detained or am I free to leave? If the officer says, you're free to leave, the game is over. Leave. If the officer says, you're detained, then you know the stop just became something they must justify later. And listen, tone matters. You are not smirking. You are not arguing. You are not reaching around, hands visible, voice even. No sarcasm. Your power here comes from calm words, not attitude. I've analyzed over 200 Bodycam videos, and the drivers who sound controlled do better than the ones who sound angry. This is 100% legal because you are asking for clarity, not resisting. You're not pulling away. You are not disobeying. You're asking a lawful question that makes the officer define your status. That one sentence can save you from standing there for 20 extra minutes just because you felt too awkward to ask. Now, once you know you are detained, your next move is huge. You look at the officer and say this, I invoke my right to remain silent. Short, clean, no speech after it. Listen closely, because this is critical. A lot of people know they have the right to stay silent, but they blow it by talking anyway. They say, I'm staying silent, but just so you know, I only had one beer. Or, I don't want to talk, but my friend left that bag in the car. That is not silence. That is self-destruction with a disclaimer. The law is simple here. You do not have to help build a case against yourself. That is true, even if you are innocent. In fact, innocent people often talk the most because they think truth will save them instantly. But stress makes people guess wrong, speak loosely, and fill gaps. Officers write reports later. They don't write your tone, they write your words. Bad way. Most drivers say, I've got nothing to hide, ask me anything. Then small details get twisted into suspicious details. Good way. Smart drivers say, I invoke my right to remain silent. Then the officer loses your free stream of evidence. That sentence works because it is clear, not vague, not half-hearted. Clear. Courts care about clarity. If you want the protection, say it plainly. Do not whisper it. Do not joke it. Say it once, maybe twice if needed, then stop talking. Now, if you are driving, you still follow lawful commands. If your state requires your name or license during a traffic stop, you provide that. Silence does not mean refusing every legal instruction. It means you stop answering investigative questions like where you were, what you drank, whose stuff is in the car. Watch what happens after people use this correctly. The officer asks, where are the drugs? The driver says, I invoke my right to remain silent. The officer asks again, same answer. The officer tries a softer version, same answer. No extra words, no angry speech, no nervous rambling, just the same shield over and over. Defense attorneys use this exact line in court because it is easy to recognize and hard to distort. Former police officers have confirmed this works because once you stop talking, the fishing gets harder. Legal experts agree this is your strongest protection after a detention becomes serious. And there is one more reason this matters. Once you are nervous, your brain wants relief. Talking feels like relief. It feels like you're helping yourself. But that relief is fake. Silence feels uncomfortable for a few seconds. Talking can hurt you for years. Most people already clicked away. If you're still here, you're in the top 10%. Drop a comment saying I'm still here because the next tactic is the one that protects you, even if the officer ignores your refusal. Now we get to the line that protects your car, your bag, and your future court case. Here's exactly what you say. Officer, I do not consent to any searches. Word for word. Memorize that line. Here's the trick they don't want you knowing. Even if an officer searches anyway, your clear refusal can still matter later. If you say yes, you make their job easier. If you clearly say no, you preserve the issue. That can help your defense later if the search was weak, stretched out, or not supported by law. Bad way. Most drivers say, sure, I've got nothing to hide. Then the officer gets your consent, and your best legal shield disappears. Good way. Smart drivers say, officer, I do not consent to any searches. then the officer must rely on actual legal grounds. This matters because of cases like Rodriguez versus United States. The Supreme Court said officers cannot drag out a traffic stop. In plain English, they cannot turn a quick stop into a search mission just because they feel like it. And in cases like Florida versus Royer, the court warned that illegal detention can poison so-called consent. If your consent comes after an unlawful detention, that can become a big issue later. So if an officer says, "You don't mind if I take a quick look, right?" You stay calm. "Officer, I do not consent to any searches." If the officer says, "Why not if you have nothing to hide?" Same answer. If the officer says, "It'll only take a minute," same answer. No debate, no speech, no explaining your rights to the officer. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings and real roadside practice. I've analyzed over 200 Bodycam videos, and officers often ask in a casual tone because casual gets consent. Your job is to stay polite and not take the bait. Now let's tie the law together in simple English. Terry v. Ohio says, police need real specific facts to briefly detain you. That is why your first question matters. What crime do you suspect me of? It pushes them to say those facts out loud. United States versus Mendenhall says, a person is seized when a normal person would not feel free to leave. That is why your second question matters. Am I being detained or am I free to leave? It forces clarity. Rodriguez versus United States says a traffic stop cannot be stretched longer than needed just to go hunting for unrelated crimes. That is why your silence and your refusal to consent matter. Here's the reality. These cases do not make you immune. They give you a script. They give you boundaries. They give you a way to stop helping the case against you. That is what smart protection looks like. Calm words, short lines, no extra talking. Let me show you exactly how this plays out in a real stop. You get pulled over for a broken taillight. The officer takes your license, then starts asking where you're coming from, where you're headed. Wrong way first. You laugh nervously. You say, "I'm just coming from my cousin's place, my friend's place." That one sentence just did 3 bad things. You gave inconsistent details. You sounded nervous, and you consented to a search. Now the stop gets longer. More questions come. Maybe a second officer shows up. Maybe they start asking about drugs, weapons, or cash. You just helped build the road. Now the right way. You hand over your documents. You stay respectful. When the questions drift, you say, "What crime do you suspect me of?" If the officer keeps pressing without answering, you ask, "Am I being detained or am I free to leave?" If the officer says you are detained, you stop feeding the stop. "I invoke my right to remain silent." If they ask to search, you say, "Officer, I do not consent to any searches." Watch what happens. The stop stays cleaner. The officer has to work with actual facts, not your nervous talking. If there is no solid reason to keep pushing, the stop often gets smaller. If the officer pushes anyway, you have preserved your rights for later. That matters more than winning a roadside argument. Your goal is not to beat the officer in the moment. Your goal is to avoid making the moment worse. And one more thing. Stay physically calm. Do not pull away. Do not reach suddenly. Do not argue over commands on the roadside. Use your words. Save your fight for court, not the shoulder of the road. Next week, I'm revealing what to say when officers claim they smell weed. Subscribe right now because that one gets people searched every single day, and most drivers answer it the worst possible way. So remember the sequence. First, make them name the reason with, "What crime do you suspect me of?" Second, make them define your status with, "Am I being detained or am I free to leave?" Third, stop helping them with, "I invoke my right to remain silent." Fourth, protect your search rights with, "Officer, I do not consent to any searches." These lines are simple, but they are powerful. They keep you calm. They keep the stop narrow. And they stop panic from making choices for you. Hit subscribe so you catch that weed smell video next week. Smash that like button if this script just changed how you'll handle your next stop. And drop a comment telling me which line you're going to memorize first. Stay safe out there.